Okay, it's 9:45 and we are about to start the session. And just so you know, there is live transcriptioning available, and you can access that by clicking on the little button next to your record button and just accepting show titles. And that should be able to get you seeing the titles, the subtitles for your transcription. Welcome to everyone who joined us. That was a wonderful morning session, and I'm still in a high and a daze from that, but we are now going to dive in a little bit to looking at something that's really on everyone's mind is really looking back to move forward in the sense, what about our first gen students as they return to campus this fall? And with us to discuss this really important topic, we have a stellar panel. I'd like to take a moment to introduce them. Rebecca Paz has a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in counseling, and she currently serves as the assistant director for the Office of First Gen Students at K-State. And throughout her extensive career in higher education, she has served in several capacities, working with retention programs and especially as first gen and underrepresented students. She is a recipient of the 2008-2009 Commerce Bank Award for Distinguished Service to Underrepresented Students at K-State University. Rebecca is a native of Bolivia and is very proud of her Latina heritage. We have with us also the very honorable and very renowned Dr. Quintin Renard Alexander. Quintin is the Senior Director of Advising of Undergraduate Education at George Mason University. And before assuming this position, he was an associate professor. I lost my screen. Sorry, I had to admit some people in and it came into my screen. And he was a professor in counselor education in the College of Education and Human Services at Longwood University and the coordinator of the college counseling and student affairs track. Previously, he had held a tenure track assistant professor position in counselor education at Virginia Commonwealth University. He holds a VA in therapeutic recreation and an MEd in special education and literacy from UNC Chapel Hill, and an MEd in community and agency counseling. He specializes in multicultural, and he also has a PhD in counselor education. He specializes in multicultural issues in advising, counseling, and student affairs centered on race, equity, and inclusion for diverse college populations, such as first generation and racial and ethnic minorities and low-income students. So welcome. And last but not least, we have our student representative from MCC, Linny Ott. Linny is a single mother of two kids, an 18-year-old who recently graduated from high school, and a 3-year-old son. Linny is currently enrolled in Human Services transfer program at MCC. She's a member of TRIO and the VP of Service for the MCC chapter of Phi Theta Kappa. Linny loves being able to give back to her community in any way she can, and we're so excited for Linny to represent the student voice on this panel. This is going to be an exciting session because we really want to see what are some of the issues that we are seeing, what are some of the challenges that students like Linny may have, and what can we as administrators do to work with Linny and help students succeed in this area, especially as they come back to campus. We have started slowly coming back, just so everyone is aware, but the full onslaught of students is going to start fall. So are we prepared? What do we need? And so we're going to kind of have a really healthy discussion about that. I would request that if you have questions for the panel, please start posting them into your chat box. Let this be an organic discussion. Let's all have something to take away with us as we leave the session. So thank you and welcome to the session and to all our presenters. And let's dive into our first question. I want to start off by kind of asking Rebecca, what has been your biggest takeaway for this during this pandemic? And what's this biggest takeaway or your aha moment in working with our first gen students?
Thank you, Nina. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for attending our session. So the biggest takeaway for me as I reflect on the pandemic is that there has been a silver lining when it comes to raising awareness about the inequalities that first generation students face. I feel that the pandemic has really brought to the surface a lot of the inequalities, the equity gaps that we have. And I think that, and so those, for example, are the financial insecurity, the food insecurity, the housing insecurity, mental health, that were probably existed before, but they were just barriered, right? And I think this is an opportunity for us to realize that these things exist and also to talk about it and bring awareness and help really close the equity gap that we have in terms of the completion rate of our first generation students.
So thank you, Rebecca. So I wanted to ask, you mentioned some things about what we were seeing and some things that were heightened. How can we best support first gen students during this challenging time as they're coming back? Institutions have been grappling with how best to support first gen students because they seem to be the ones who are particularly affected, especially with an intersectional of low income identity, and they face various difficulties such as lack of permanent housing, transportation issues, as you spoke of, food insecurity, concern over lack of income from on-campus or local employment. How can we best support first-generation students during this challenging time? I'm going to ask you, Quentin, and then we're probably going to get Lenny to jump in here and also add here.
Sure, that's a great question because it also varies by institution and region. And having been at two institutions, so transitioning from Longwood University, which is in a very sort of remote rural community, to George Mason University, which is a huge metropolitan area, this has looked different. And so the solutions for both universities has been different, but there are a lot of commonalities. I think one of the things is not to make assumptions. There are a lot of assumptions that are made about our first generation student populations and what they do and do not need. And as Rebecca said, these assumptions are made even before COVID, but now they're incredibly illuminated. And I'm in the middle of analyzing some research data that two former colleagues of mine and I at Longwood were doing with a group of students we were working with before the pandemic. And they were a group of first generation racial and ethnic minority students who were also low income. So it was the trifecta for first generation college students. And what we saw in the past 3 or 4 years was really illuminated when students were suddenly at home, right? And we were able to bring to light to the university, here are issues we've talked about all along, but here are things that you have assumed. We assume that first generation students, parents don't really care about them, right? When the data shows quite the opposite. They care a lot about their children, but they also need help in understanding what their students are going through. And so what we found in our data was that the students really struggled a lot with that balance between dedication to family and dedication to their actual school and academics, and helping family understand that though I'm home, I'm still in school. Okay. And the prime example I give is when I used to go home from college, my mother didn't care if I was home from college, during a break. She said, go cut the grass. I wouldn't cut the grass. And so just really understanding that the assumptions that are out there are not how we need to address. We need to do a needs assessment. We need to understand what each student's experience is, and we need to address it in that way. I think one thing we're finding at George Mason, there was the assumption that every first generation student or students from different backgrounds would not want to come back to campus, or that they were ready to come back to campus because they wanted to get away from their homes, right? The data is showing quite the opposite. Right. The waiting list for our online courses has almost tripled. And then we're seeing a dip in in-person classes with several reasons for that, right? If they're staying at home, then there's more security at home. There may be reasons why they're doing that. So I think we really need to think about listening to the students and not making the assumptions that are often made without having the data to support that. I think that's critically important. And I've seen that in multiple areas where they're just assumptions made, and they've been made all the time, and they're incorrect. So that's one of the things I just want to talk about and get across. Yes.
Excellent. So assumptions, thinking about what we think the problems to be, and then actually going out and finding the data for it. It goes back to what Dr. Larry Abel mentioned in his opening keynote. He talked exactly about this. He said, tell me how you know. So Linny, you are here to tell us how we could know. So
Yes.
can you sort of unmute and let us know what has your experience been like when the pandemic hit? What were your struggles? And now coming back to college in fall, coming back to the campus, being a regular student again, what were your challenges and what do you see as your worries or concerns coming back?
Well, like Dr. Alexander said, my son is my biggest concern right now. With him being 3, he's in between Head Start and being at home with mom. And I'm always by myself. I don't have any family or anything around, so it's kind of difficult. But I will agree on the wanting to stay home. I have checked for remote classes. I'm not a big fan of online because you definitely want that instructor there, because we struggle with, knowing what we're supposed to be doing and still learning the courses and things like that. And wanting to do our best, but we still at that same time want to spend time with our families. And transportation is always a hassle, and things like that. For me, that was my biggest, is I really enjoyed the time with my son, even though sometimes he likes to join class with me. He does have daycare, but he's not always in daycare, and sometimes the classes don't fit in that schedule. But I would prefer to be at home with him and be able to multitask with both class and what I have to do being a single mom, than drive to like one of our Fort campuses or anything like that. And my degree is not always offered at South Campus because the classes are at the Fort campus. So I would have to go there to take my classes. And so for me, having to travel or get him up even earlier or anything like that. And with the weather, of course, we all know Nebraska is a little crazy on weather. So I'm really nervous about that. But that was my biggest challenge, was juggling, staying home and deciding whether or not to go back to class and all that. But when it first started, I thought it would be a bad thing. I actually enjoyed being home. I enjoyed, having that freedom of being able to be right there if something happened, not having to worry about, not being able to check my phone in case of an emergency or anything. And that was definitely a big thing. But the biggest challenge, I think, for me was, like I said, the online course, because I'm a hands-on type of person and I like to have things explained to me. I'm a very visual and, hands-on learner. And that was so difficult for me to have to, get my information off the computer or try and understand it, and no one there to actually ask right then and there. I would have to email and wait for a response. And I think that was probably one of my biggest things. I would say really like just having that moment of security, really, and knowing like what we need would probably be the biggest thing. Like asking, do you understand the material? Do you need like meetings with me? I have an instructor now who does Zoom meetings with me, like on the spot whenever I need them. He's amazing. Mr. Rush, he's just an amazing instructor. And I've got other teachers who are just so supportive. And of course, my trio advisors, they're amazing too. But I would say that's probably my biggest one, definitely. And you're right, the staying at home has probably definitely tripled, because I myself am on those waiting lists for the remote classes and stuff. So I definitely understand that.
So what we're hearing is, although, and I know, I think Veronica's in the session. So Veronica is our, works with our ELL population, and they did a session yesterday on, collaborating to support ELL students. And I think one of their aha moments was exactly that there's more access to remote classes as a result of this. And we kind of wonder why we didn't do this before. And so COVID has pushed us to do an online, offer online sessions and have Zoom available. Linny, if you think back to, when we said, okay, crisis, COVID, shut down, go home, what was your first thought? Like, what is it that Metro could have done more to have supported you? Or what systems could have been in place? What did you feel that we lacked that we didn't have?
Communication was probably the biggest thing because I was really scared with, not having them right there to ask and not being able to, get right to my advisor if I needed something. That was probably the more difficult thing, knowing like what we're expected to do, like how this was going to be laid out, because it was very, everyone was really unsure. And I understand it was new for all of us, including, the college, but that was probably the biggest thing. And as the newsletters started to get a little bit better and started to get a little more frequent, it was easier to be well informed, because staying on that schedule, especially when you're home, is very difficult. Time management is so huge. And I would say now, like with the sessions that we offer and all the different things that they teach, financial support, time management, stress management, especially self-care is so important. Now that we're on course with that, those are very, very helpful. So things like that would have been amazing in the beginning, because a lot of us are freaking out, we don't know what to do. And really taking the moment to breathe, to remember about yourself as well as, what you've got going on. I think that was probably the biggest thing. So, having those support, just any support at all, was just amazing. So that was probably my biggest fear, was not having that classroom to run to or that teacher to be right there for me and, to be able to help. And I had to kind of wing it and have my 3-year-old on the side at the same time and figure out when to spend those times, doing class, doing homework. It was quite the thing, definitely.
I applaud your resilience, because I think Dr. Rendon also spoke a lot about students and their resilience during this time. And I can see a lot of resilience in you, Linny. I want to bring out another point though. As we're thinking about first generation students, and they account for more than a third of the national undergraduate enrollment. But among these undergraduates, we have classifications, or we have further we're able to take these groups and further analyze them. And we see that the Department of Education has classified as 41% of Black and 61% of Latinx students as first generation. But in contrast, 25% of white and Asian American students were found to belong to this demographic. So further, what is again, worthy of consideration is that first generation students showed lower median household income than non-first generation students. So 27% of first-gen students came from households making 20,000 or less, which is below the federal poverty line for a family of 3. Now, how can we, as a college, work to close this higher education equity gap? Quentin, I'll start with you, and yeah.
That's great. That kind of, I was thinking in my mind just now, some of the things that we're starting to look at. And so one of the things that we found in our data, we have a CRM that allows us to pull a lot of data on students who are attending advising sessions. What we found during this time of COVID is that a significant increase, almost 300% of racial and ethnically diverse students and first generation students, not only scheduling, but attending advising sessions. So I had some informal conversations with some students, and I actually plan to do a study about it. But most of them said things such as, I did not have to drive to campus, find a parking space, risk getting a parking ticket to walk 15 minutes across campus to find a room I can't find to sit in for 30 minutes, right? They said I could just whip out my phone or my iPad and have a advising session when I needed it. And so we found a lot of these students access walk-in hours more frequently. A lot of these students attended their sessions. And so what we've done is we've looked at, okay, so we are sort of pivoting to students can do in-person sessions and virtual sessions, and working with the different academic units to allow their advisors to have flex hours, because we have a category of students that we call contemporary students. These are students that are not ages 18 to 24. Most will call them non-traditional. And so these students are sometimes working, full day schedules and then taking evening classes, and that's when they need access to an advisor. So then equity there, when it comes, that's financial equity, that's just access equity. There are lots of different things that we could do to address those issues, particularly with students who are racial and ethnic minority students. Also, in this, when I was doing my dissertation at Virginia Tech back in 2007 through 11, I worked with a group of African-American women who had attended HBCU, and they were at Virginia Tech for graduate studies. And part of their conversation with me was about the desire to go see someone that they do not know, right? There became a cultural trust factor based on experiences they had on the campus that were external to advising. And they were more apt to engage with someone on the phone or by Zoom, or at the time was WebEx, than they would to go actually physically sit in an office. So working with students on transitioning them to face-to-face, if they want that, particularly racial and ethnic minorities, when the majority of the academic advisors are white females, there's a huge trust factor there. They would have to consider with that trifecta of first-generation students, also low-income students. First-generation students are least likely to go see an academic advisor for a lot of reasons, right? Not knowing what the advisor does. In one of my studies, I discovered that students thought that office hours meant that was when they weren't supposed to bother their instructors. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of things that came to light. I was like, wow, so how can we help transition these students into this space where they have control, where they have the autonomy, where they can kind of feel comfortable? Because I often hear, well, we're here, but they don't come see us. And I'm like, but are you accessible in the format where they feel comfortable seeing you? What have you done to do outreach in their community within the college campus parameters? We've done a lot of going out to working with our multicultural students. Say, I have advisors that sit in there, right? And I did that at Longwood. I went and sat, I taught graduate school, but I worked with a lot of undergraduate students. The program we ran there. And I met these students by going to sit in the student union because that's where they were. And so it's meeting them where they are. It's understanding what their pain points may be for access and really addressing those in what I call tangible real-time things. We can put lots of programs out there that we think are great. But most of the program ideas that I've gotten have been from actually talking to students, say, what do you need and how can we get it to you?
That's really great. Rebecca, do you have anything to add there in terms of what supports do you think, Quentin spoke a lot about being visible, having a sense of, not just waiting for them to come and reach us, but to actually go out. And I know Linny has a story about advisors coming out to her. We're going to get to that part of it. But Rebecca, how can we create visibility of our services?
Thank you. And thank you, Quentin. You said you touched on a lot of very important points, talking about equity. And I think going back to your question, Nina, I think the idea of meeting students where they are, that is figuratively and specifically speaking, it means going to the student union, but it may also be being helping them where they are developmentally, right? Or maybe if the student needs computer, right? Advocate for that student. If the student has, like Lenny, a situation in which they have a child and what they really need is an online environment education, help that student. And also going back to what Quentin said earlier, let's not make assumptions. And I also think that as we are going to go back to 2021 post-pandemic, hopefully it's post-pandemic, we still have to continue to figure out what are the needs of our students and how can we meet them where they are, and whatever that really means for a non-traditional student, that's going to be very different than for the traditional students that I work at K-State. For instance, at K-State, we're a predominantly white university. And so a small percentage of our first generation students, unfortunately, are students of color, right? But I still want to be able to, I understand that the equity gap in terms of retention and graduation is bigger. And so, for example, as our institution, something that we're trying to do is disaggregate the data, look at the data, right? And see where the really gaps are. And maybe start creating big picture goals. For example, looking at classes, right? Maybe there's a specific class where first generation students don't perform as well as continuing generation students. So working with the Teaching and Learning Center to find out, okay, what are the things that we could do? Are there workshops that we can do? Something that we've done with our office is we've partnered with the Teaching and Learning Center, and we started doing workshops on inclusive pedagogies and creating awareness about first generation students. And I think that's something that our campus has been doing, is that awareness creation is very, very it's creating awareness about their needs, but also their strengths, right? Because advisors may not know what it's like to be a first generation student and what barriers and what challenges they have, but also start creating awareness as an institution and just get down to the nitty gritty, right? The two examples that both Dr. Alexander and Lenny presented, their stories are so real, but yet it's not one size fits all. The other piece I wanted really to us to think about is the financial piece, because we know that's the number one reason why students, first generation students, do not complete, right? It's not because they're not smart enough, and it's finances. And I also think enrollment numbers, at least in our state, for first gen students are going down. And I really believe it's also because they don't know that they can afford it. But beyond affording the 4 years or the 2 years, I think we also need to start thinking about taking student loans and what happens after they graduate. Because I've seen a lot of my first gen students graduate with a lot of debt. And I think that setting them up for starting out with debt after graduation is also another way of setting them up for another another equity gap. So to wrap up, I think it's financial. We need to really be aware of that and how as institutions we're going to help those students, because again, when they graduate, let's not send them out with $60,000 or $200,000 or whatever number debt. They need to pay rent. They need to start saving for a house, for a home, to start their families. And the other piece is meeting them where they are. I think that's so important today more than ever. And where they are is different for each student. And then also we need to be aware of their intersecting identities and how those play out. For example, Lenny, as a non-traditional student, her experience is very different from some of my students who are traditional, who love to be in the classroom and they cannot wait to get back in the classroom. So we need to provide all those support services. And I think for us as practitioners, what it means, we need to be flexible and we need to collaborate and talk to one another and share our students' stories so we really know what's going on with them.
Yeah, that's I like those points about creating financial literacy among our students. And another key takeaway I took from what you said is those awareness campaigns. So it seems like, and I know Veronica is on here and there are a few others who work in TRIO, like I think Deb Lahoda is here as well. So the thing is, we as probably people who work with underrepresented populations probably know some of these challenges because we interact a lot. And the idea that to create some awareness campaigns around the college, just to go around and share what those experiences are like, and also bring the student voice into those awareness campaigns is an important takeaway, I think, as you just mentioned. Lenny, I want to bring it back to you and talking a little bit about, meeting students where they're at, coming out to you. And I know you shared a very nice story with me the other day when we were talking, and that really also was the power of that relationship between advisors and advisees or your students. Can you elaborate on what that means to you as a student?
Well, it was probably the most important relationship I formed at MCC. I did not join TRIO for the first quarter that I was in school because I was unaware of the benefits and, of course, being nervous, not wanting to jump into something that I had no idea about. And
I have a question. Did you, as in you weren't aware, is it that you felt like it wasn't for you, or it was just not marketed for you to understand it?
I had gotten the information. I didn't quite understand all of the benefits and how it was actually going to go. I was more nervous about adding something to my plate already because I was nervous about having, 3 classes going on with my kids and everything. But when I met my advisor, of course, I was a little nervous at first, but Marty Martinez is the most amazing person ever. He was very supportive, explained everything thoroughly, and he would always be there for me to remind me on things, because with my busy schedule, he knew that sometimes I would, maybe not realize something was coming up quickly, and he would help me through whatever I needed. If I needed books, anything like that, supplies, amazing person. But having him right there to ask immediately, I mean, he was my go-to for everything. If I had any questions, concerns, he knew the resources that were available. He knew where to go, who to talk to. And I mean, I never had a doubt in my mind that I would not be able to get help from Marty. I knew that no matter what, he would at least find the answer if he didn't know it. And this gentleman came to my house to bring me groceries. He would bring me supplies. I would meet him to grab things because I have my son with me and everything. And I'm just so grateful that the day I had to find out that he was retiring, I cried. I literally cried reading the email. And I was so devastated because I was just like, what am I going to do now? That was my first thought, was what do I do without Marty? And it was just, I mean, heart-wrenching when I had to see him, because he actually brought me more supplies that evening. And he was like, don't worry, you know, I'm taking the summer off, but I'm going to try to come back, you know, part-time maybe or something. He's like, but I'm always here. You've got my number. I'm always here for you. And, you know, it's like a family member for me. Like I felt like I was losing my favorite uncle or something like that. Like it was very heart-wrenching. But, you know, knowing that he's always there no matter what, because Marty is so hands-on that he knows what his students need. Whether, you know, they're assuming something that about us or anything, he's the one that advocates for us to be like, you know, this is what's actually going on with them. Like he knew what was going on with my household. He knew my troubles. He knew that, you know, I have surgery coming up. So he was preparing me for that too. And it was just that fear of him not being there to be supportive was so difficult. But of course, I've got Kathy now. She's amazing too. And they have such a great connection that she was automatically informed of my situation and what I needed. But I like I said, I wouldn't have had anything without that relationship with Marty. Like he is just such an advocate for me and for my family and for anything going on. And that was highly important for me. So, you know, I can't say enough about him.
Lenny, I mean, Marty's a special person. Definitely. I mean, I get all teary just thinking about Marty. But I want to really stress, you know, the power of relationships. And we heard it through Dr. Rendon. We've heard it even yesterday when Veronica and Anna and others in the ELL conversation spoke about the power of relationships. I want to ask Quentin this question, because this is something that I've seen as a trainer. There's a lot to unpack here, right? Lenny is bringing with her to the table Lenny's, you know, the weight of Lenny's life, right? And Marty is a special kind of person. You know, sometimes you feel like there's this 1 in a million kind of people that come along, and Marty's that person. How can we as advisors, we all cannot be Marty? You know, it's not possible. And so we're not going to, even though we try to aspire to it, how is it that we as advisors who have caseloads that have students with this kind of complex situations, we want to support them? But how can we make sure that we have enough of us to give?
So I think that question's sort of two-pronged, right? The first piece I heard, and there was a lot of advocacy. And I think that the assumption is with advocacy, this is coming clearly from my counseling background, is that advocacy is something that everyone wants in the same form. I went out, I did this. So we don't want to get into that tailspin of always doing. One thing I found out in working with students, even when I started working with students in this area at Virginia Tech all the way through academia right now, is that we have to understand whether students will really need to act with our student. That means teaching them skills they need, okay, to be able to go out and do things for themselves. And a lot of them have that personality where they can do that and desire to do that, particularly our first generation students and our students of color on college campuses, who often feel marginalized in those white spaces, right? And so I had to give you an example. I had a student who had studied his lights out for a test. And I saw him in the student union, and I said, did you apply all those skills we talked about? And he had come to all the sessions for study, and he goes, yeah, but I made it 74. And I was like, okay, so that's great. He goes, but I think that the professor graded my test wrong. And I was like, okay, so did you speak with him? And he goes, well, no. Well, part of that was he didn't know how. So we talked about how he would do that. We role played it. And I said, would you like me to go speak to Professor Ford? He goes, no, I got it. And so it took me just teaching him the skill and role playing. Student came back 2 days later. I saw him, he was just beaming. He goes, he forgot to grade one of my questions. I made a 93 on the test, actually. So that was an instance of something we do every day with students, that we advocate with our students. We teach them lots of skills they need to learn. There's advocating on behalf of our students, right? There's certain things that students cannot do because they are students, where we are in positions of power where we can. You know, another example was at George Mason, right? We had a number of students who were academically suspended. When they're academically suspended, all their access to everything on campus is cut off. That meant that they could not go into Navigate and schedule appointments with their advisors and take advantage of the resources that will help them learn the skills that when they get back to campus, they will stay on campus, right? And so I had a conversation. I said, what data tells us that sending students home for a semester to sit there by themselves and do nothing means they're going to be successful when they come back? Have we looked at what skills they need, and the fact that academic units provide these things that they can't get to the students because of purpose? So you don't just email a random email address, because there are all sorts of things. Well, within 2 hours, they then granted access to every student that was academically suspended and were due to come back to campus. So we need to understand what advocacy means. And I think that by us listening to students and letting students tell us how they want us to advocate for them could be one of the most effective things that we could do.
That's really an important distinction, to be able to preserve our well-being as well, but to have systems in place so that it doesn't lead to burnout as well. Because caseloads are a huge factor, right? We have a huge number of students. Are we reaching everybody? How can we reach everybody? Constantly that question. So Rebecca, I want to bring us back to thinking about, I know that in your college, you had mentioned that you do not see this intersection as much, but I'm wondering if you would answer the question about high quality education during a remote learning environment. How can we work to understand the needs of this student demographic? As we are talking about a sustained digital transformation in our colleges, right? We're moving towards that. And how can we continue to understand the needs of the student demographic and provide equitable support? Because, Linny seems to have the resilience figured out and she's been able to really navigate those loopholes and systems and be able to succeed. And we're very happy for her. But what about others who may not have that equitably laid out for them? How can we make sure that some of the digital transformations that our colleges are heading towards will be mindful of the student demographic?
Thank you. I think, piggybacking a little bit on what Dr. Alexandra said is the importance of self-efficacy and teaching students self-advocacy, right? But I also think that as advisors, if you are in an advisory role, you have a unique opportunity to help every single student. So I think what it boils down to is creating safe spaces for the students. So going back to the trust issue that Dr. Alexander talked about earlier, creating that trust, because I think that for especially for our students who come from marginalized populations, there's a lot of issues there, as you know, and them all played out in the national landscape on TV, and those things come up in our campuses. I think it's really important for us to listen to their stories and to understand them. So that's the first step, I think, creating those safe spaces where somebody can share their story, like Linny did with her TRIO advisor, and he was able to help her out, right? And so I think that's huge, creating those spaces so that we can advocate for the students and support. So I think this goes tied into the relationship, the power of relationship. So essential, because I think in advising, if it just becomes take this class, go on, then the student is just not going to feel supported. So I think developing that relationship and being authentic, it's really important. And so advocacy also, I believe it comes up when we go to meetings And I think also as first, like front responders are the advisors, right? You guys are basically right there in the front lines. You understand, you're learning what's happening with the students. You understand their stories. And so voicing those stories to the upper administrations, the decision makers, so institutions are able to make decisions based on students' need. And again, going back to meeting students where they are, and that means listening to them, providing a safe space, teaching them self-advocacy, because yes, that's so important. And I really appreciate Dr. Alexander's example that he had the courage to go and talk to his professor. And that's a skill he's gonna take for the next time and the next time. And when he goes into the workplace, when he doesn't get the raise, you know, you give him the courage, you give them the, you know, the assurance that he could do it. You build that confidence. Another piece I think that is really essential for us, and it goes back to helping the students, you know, help them understand their intersecting identities, to have those conversations. Or maybe there are different pockets on campus that are having those conversations, because I think as you know, college students, they're in the developmental stage when they're exploring their identity. But if you're a Latino student, you're exploring your Latino identity and how do you fit in. And if you add another layer of identity, LGBTQ, you know, all those things they play out in this world in which they're navigating and learning to navigate. And so for them to create those spaces and opportunities to talk about it, and also to develop pride in their first gen identity. And I also go back to another topic that was mentioned before, the resiliency. It is so part of the first generation students. When I talk to my first generation students who are getting ready to graduate, we have a graduation reception. I tell them, you know, your resiliency is your superpower, and really own that resiliency, because it is a superpower, and it's a superpower that is going to get you through these next years, but it's also going to get you through your career and all that. So going back, you know, power of relationships, advocate and support, and advocacy of support has different ways of doing that. It could be writing a letter of reference, but it could also be voicing students' concerns to the upper administration so that they break barriers as an institution. Because as Dr. Alexander mentioned before, each institution is different, right? And we have different landscapes, we have different ways of doing things, and also we have different student populations. But, you know, what are those barriers in this in the system? And so I believe advisors have a unique opportunity to make an impact, because you have the power to voice it to your deans, to your department heads. This is what's happening with my first generation students. This is what happened with my African American students, right? If there is a racial incident, let's bring it up. Let's not just put it under the table. And this is how our students are feeling, so that we can start having those conversations, so that we can all understand their intersecting identities. Because I also feel like we all have to have a growth mindset and listen to your students. For my own experience, I learned the most from my students, and I need to listen, because the moment I don't listen, I'm not going to learn. I'm also realizing, you know, as new generations come in, they have different learning styles, and I have to understand where they're coming from if I want to help them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, Linny, you had something to add here.
I do. That is such a good point. The support and the, you know, just teaching us what we needed to know. If it hadn't been for Marty explaining things to me and pushing me to really, you know, strive and do what I needed to do, I actually transferred from a business degree to my human services transfers, because he realized that my passion was helping people. Like, I really loved all of my human relation classes and things like that. He noticed that was my pattern. I kept going back to them. So he was like, this is more of what you're leaning towards, it seems like. And because of him, I chose a different path, and I wanted to help people in the community find resources easier, because I didn't have that. I didn't have anyone to ask. And he was there to tell me, like, you know, oh, you might be interested in this group. This one might help you, or something like that. He didn't have to be like physically there for me all the time. But if I shot him an email about something, you know, he'd answer me anytime. And it was really great, because even though I knew his caseload was amazingly huge and the man just multitasked like no other, I did not want to bother him with my questions. but after a while, I became comfortable with it because I could trust him to just, help me out real quick, nothing really big or anything, but he had just that little bit that would help me take it further by myself. I grew by myself, with my own abilities. And if it hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have done anything because I'm kind of a shyer person if I don't really know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But because of him, I went to a booth that had a PTK member who became like family for me. And I wound up telling her I was a member of PTK. I spent an hour speaking with her and I ran for VP of service and I wound up becoming VP of service. And that for me, thank you, that opened up so many avenues because I became more confident. And there were so many people that I've met since then. So my network has just built so much. And I've found people who have been so supportive for me. And my PTK members are my family because I don't have any family, as I've said before, around. And if I have something that's going on, they are there to support me. They are there to show me who's there to help out or whether I can go a different avenue. But these things just, showing us what we needed, my financial sessions with Trio, things like that. Those are my tools. That's what I put in my tool bag to grow as a person. And if I hadn't had somebody to tell me about those things, I wouldn't even known. I would have never even gone because I would have just focused on just my class. I wouldn't have taken any extra time or known that it was something I could fit into my busy schedule. But also, I love being in class. I'm a social person. I grew up in a big family, but I was a younger kid, so I had to, jump in there all the time. And my classes, I love being in, but at the same time, having them remote to be able to do them just like now, it saved me so much time and energy of having to drive across town or worry about the weather or packing up my kids and stuff. But I still wanted that interaction. And that has been probably one of the biggest things is really being able to have that interaction also. I wanted to mention that when we were talking about it earlier, because it's very important to have that social interaction and not just be on a computer online, because that's kind of what brings on depression and things like that. So it really perks me up whenever I have a class that I enjoy and I look forward to that class on those days. I know it's coming. I know I'm going to have that smile on my face for that moment. And that's a very important thing to me also. So I just want to make sure you guys knew that, how important you guys really are, even if it's just the tiniest interaction.
Thank you, Lini. Quentin, I'm hearing all this and I'm kind of thinking about, as Lini said, the fact that PTK opened up so many opportunities for her and the fact that it was an advisor who led her down to that. And so that connection between student engagement and first generation students, right? Getting them active on campus. Now we're a community college. The assumption is, I'm using the word assumption because as you said, we need to make assumptions and not facts, is students who are first gen don't have time to participate in activities on campus. So what are we doing wrong? I know we have Shanda on here and Shanda leads all our clubs and orgs. And Shanda does an amazing job with some of our sessions that we offer in clubs and orgs. But again, the question is, how do we get students to come? They don't come. So when I'm hearing from Lini is, what is that magic element that how can we incorporate engagement into the first generation student experience?
Yeah, I think that go back to something that Rebecca was talking about is having a growth mindset. One of the things I think about when I think about the first gen students I work with, I look at them from a very asset-based perspective. What is it that they have to contribute from themselves to the university? If you can find that one thing, okay, or those two things, and then connect those students with those resources. Sometimes it takes physically taking them there so that they see they belong in that space, and then continue to encourage them. I can't tell you the number of functions that I went to during the middle of the day. I taught graduate school, so I was there in the evenings, at 6. But the number of functions I would go to during the day for those undergrads I was working with, because I knew that it would encourage them to see my face there supporting them. If they were tabling something, if they were dancing in a recital, whatever they were doing, I think they have to feel that sense of support and that they're contributing. Because I think there's often a very deficit-based approach to working with first generation students. They need this, they need that. It's not that they always need, yes, they need some things, but a lot of what they need sometimes is to understand how they fit into that puzzle. And so having those really honest conversations with them, help them understand how that sort of engagement not only benefits what they can do in the future, but how it will benefit the university, how they are an important part of that puzzle that makes a university. I think a lot of times these students see themselves as the other, so they don't feel like they deserve to join a fraternity or sorority. They don't deserve to do this because they're just happy to be there. And I'm like, no, you're a part of this. And so having that honest dialogue with them and encouraging them, and it's hard because a lot of times it's like pulling teeth. But I think when you get them there the first time, it's not just getting them there, it's also encouraging them to continue, asking them about what they've done, what they can contribute from their own culture to the university campus. And then one of the things looking at with our new CRM is oftentimes we get these alerts when students aren't doing well, right? But we never get alerts when, say, students who are middle of the road or students who are from particular populations are doing well. And what we're finding in our data at the university is that we're losing those students to other universities, right? We do well with students who come in that need a lot, but we're losing those students who sit right in the middle. And I think a lot of our first generation students sit right there in the middle a lot of times. And so, we're making a very intentional approach to reaching out to those students with these opportunities. And so I think we just have to be cognizant and aware that those students aren't just there to learn about academics, but we need to get to know them as individuals, as people, because what they can contribute to that microcosm of society at a university or college, they can also see themselves contributing that to the real world when they leave. And I think that's an important connection to make with them. That is part of what we do as advisors, make those connections for those students and help them see themselves in those spaces.
I really like that. Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Yes, I really appreciate that you brought up the asset-based lens, because even when we talk about the lack of social and cultural capital, that we know that translates into students not understanding the system, not having the friends, the connections, that could also be like a deficit-based lens. And I think we really need to really focus on the richness and how our students enrich the campus experience. And so our first generation students, especially the students from underrepresented populations, have a lot of cultural wealth. And this cultural wealth, if they're bilingual and their families came from, they immigrated, that's a lot of wealth right there, and resiliency, of success, of grit, and all those things. I think it's really important as institutions, as advisors, and help those students make those connections, because yes, Quentin, those contributions to our campus also are contributions to the society, because it's not just about the next 2 years and the next 4 years, it's how are they going to be out there in the real world, making social change, contributing to this country. And I think making those connections that they realize how much not only do they belong, but how they enrich our campuses and their cultural wealth. So, this capital that they didn't have when they came in, and we're talking about cultural and social capital, they're gaining that now. By the time they leave, they have so much to contribute to our society. So I think the more we see as students through that lens, and help them understand through that lens too, because as you understand, and you've probably all heard, that there's the imposter syndrome, and the imposter syndrome is something that it happens a lot with first-gen students, and not only when they're in college, also when they become practitioners, when they go get their PhDs, when they join, the whatever workforce, whether it's in higher education or corporate America. We need to also have those conversations and become aware of it, because, building that self-confidence is also essential. So there are different layers, lots of layers, but going back to that asset-based lens and how they are part of the puzzle of this university puzzle, but bigger picture of society and how they can really make a contribution. I think it's really very important to keep that in mind.
Excellent. I think this is just a wonderful discussion. I think we could talk forever. We are coming up to the last 5 minutes, and as a as a closing, and if anyone has questions in the chat, I can see conversation going on. I know a lot of us are thinking about coming back, like, fall. What is fall going to look like? So Linny, can you give us one thing that you think is going to be super important that you are going to need when you come back, and what advisors can do for you? And then Quentin, we'll talk about the similar thing from administrative perspectives. How can we support advisors? And Rebecca, what are some of the resources we need to have ready to go, as this is our first aid kit, or this is what we need to have set up? Linny, you can start.
I would say listening to us is probably going to be the biggest thing, because it's a transition, especially with like your power outages that have been happening. I still don't even have internet right now due to Cox Communications being out, and that's been since like a week already. And so for me, transitioning back into class, like there's so many different things that I have to adjust: my home life, my schedule, all of that. And so really asking the student, like, where are you sitting? What's going on? Do you need any support from me? What resources do we need to look at for you? Like, what do you need right at this moment to help you transition back into class? And I think that listening part to them, just really hearing them and asking them, because not many students want to say it out loud because they don't want to voice that they have problems or that they have, an issue, especially in front of the entire class. Like, they don't want that. They want more of a one-on-one, just shoot them a kind of an email being like, hey, what can I do for you? Or what support do you need so I can shoot you to somebody who can help you? That's probably going to be the biggest thing, especially, like I said, just making them comfortable with coming back to class, because it's going to be a very nervous, very, nerve-wracking, making sure you've got everything on time and schedules are all set, and changing your whole life around again, because that's what COVID did to us. It changed everything around, and now we've got to change it all back again. And I personally am nervous because, like I said, my classes are going from South Campus to Fort Campus. And for me, that was a big change in size of campus, of course, but also my schedule. It makes me nervous because I don't want to, miss out or be late for class, because, you don't want to do that. So the support, hopefully, is just the same as it always is, during this time too. And that's really what we need, just full support.
Thank you so much, Linny. Yes, listening is going to be key. And then kind of, as we've pivoted, we have to also listen and pivot again. So Quentin, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I just want to say, one of the things we should look at in terms of from an administrative point of view is looking at the fact that our advisors have lived this pandemic as well. So what advisors have been during this time are just tremendous heroes. They've mitigated issues between poor instruction because instructors are not prepared to teach this way, right? So really no fault of their own, a lack of responsiveness or resources. Advisors have had to put on a cape in their mask, and they've had to fly the entire while navigating their own personal lives. And so one of the things we as administrators can do is really advocate for the fact that we have advisors who are going to come back who are wary of the rise of COVID cases that are happening right now with this new variant, right? And what that feels like to sit in an office with a student, particularly if your university is not required that students have vaccinations when they come back. So you're often sitting in small spaces. So the flexibility to work flex schedules. We've been virtual, but now this gradual transition back, flex schedules will not only be beneficial to the advisor, so they can take care of their personal needs, because they may still have someone at home who's not working. They may have students who are still not going back to school fully, depending on where you are geographically. There are lots of things that they're going to need to navigate. So understanding that advisors have needs that often parallel the needs of the students. And so where we're expected to be flexible and to meet the needs of the students, the university needs to be flexible and be able to meet the needs of the advisors, because if we don't, then advisors are not going to be psychologically ready to help students. So, one of the things that we're doing, we are working through, maybe work 2 days a week, come to campus and do that, but do it in a way that there's always coverage. We're also flexing schedules, understanding that students are going to require later hours for advising. So it may mean that you start work at 12 noon as an advisor on one day and finish at 8. But that 5 to 8 period may be at home where you have walk-in hours. So you have your computer on, you have your signal on, so that if a student pops in, it's just being creative with the advisors to make sure that they're taken care of in the space. And then I think another thing is just to be realistic about the fact that advisors need support and to do things with them, the little things that help them feel appreciated, right? Just help them understand how valuable they are, not by just telling them, but also by doing things. I think this is critically important. Otherwise, we're going to start to experience burnout and advisors not wanting to return to campus because they feel unsafe. Or advisors, and lots of our advisors just simply burn out from the last 12 to 18 months. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Rebecca, any last points?
Yes, I would like to echo everything that was said by Quentin and Lenny, and also add to, as we emphasize the flexibility piece and how we need to collaborate with everybody on campus and listen to everybody. But in transitions, we always think of transitions as the freshman students, but we're all going to go back to a transition, right? I'm going to be going back. My brain band span is going to be maybe a little shorter, right? Understand that piece, but also think of the sophomores, the students who are coming back as second-year students. They didn't have the experience, the regular experience, so we need to think of ways to support them as well. And so they are not going to be the traditional sophomore students, right? Because they didn't have the college experience for the first year. So think of ways to help with that transition for not only the freshmen and the transfer students, but also the sophomores, but also for everybody, right? Because if you're a junior or a senior, or you're in your last year, you're still going to be transitioning. So think in terms of what a transition means for everybody, and certainly creating those safe spaces, because we just don't know what this is going to look like. Like Quentin indicated, what if there's a new variant, and we may need to step up and just have the mindset that we need to be flexible and supportive of each other as well.
Excellent. I think we've run out of time. I want to take a moment to thank all of you. What a wonderful session this was, and such great points. Thank you, Lenny, for joining. Your perspective is precious to us, and you are the reason we do the work we do, and to see you succeed is just wonderful. And so we're hoping that we can take away some of these wonderful gems that Dr. Alexander and Rebecca have shared with us today, and we all go back and try something different and be supportive, and also take care of ourselves in the process. So thank you very much, and hope to see you in our next session. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
For everything you do. Thank you.
Thank you.